They say secrets have a way of coming to light, no matter how deeply you try to bury them. For years, I lived in a delicate balance, juggling my marriage to Eric, the life we'd built together, and the dangerous, intoxicating affair I'd started with my boss, David. I told myself it was under control, that no one would ever find out. But like any house of cards, my double life came crashing down the moment the truth slipped into the open. Eric and I had been married for 10 years, and on the surface, our life looked perfect. We had a beautiful home, a group of supportive friends, and 2 golden retrievers who acted more like children than pets. People often commented on how lucky we were, how happy we seemed. And for a while, I believed it too. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. It started innocently enough, late nights at the office, brainstorming sessions that ran longer than they should have, the occasional after-work drink to celebrate a successful project. David was charming, confident, and knew how to make you feel like the most important person in the room. He was everything Eric wasn't: spontaneous, exciting, a little dangerous. I should have stopped it before it went too far. I should have recognized the warning signs. But I didn't. The first time it happened, I told myself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness that would never happen again. But then it happened again. And again. Before I knew it, the affair became a constant in my life. A secret I carried with me every day, one that grew heavier with each lie I told Eric. At first, I thought I could manage it. David and I kept things discreet, careful never to leave a trail. I made sure to give Eric plenty of attention at home, cooking his favorite meals, planning date nights, and keeping up appearances. But no matter how hard I tried, the cracks began to show. One evening, as Eric and I sat on the couch watching TV, he turned to me with a curious expression. "You've been working a lot lately," he said casually. "Yeah, things have been crazy at the office," I replied, forcing a smile. He nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Of course," I said quickly. "Why wouldn't it be?" He hesitated before saying, "I don't know. You've just seemed different." I laughed, brushing off his concern. "You're imagining things," I said, leaning in to kiss him. But his words lingered in my mind long after he fell asleep. The turning point came during a company retreat, a weekend trip meant to strengthen team dynamics and celebrate our successes. David and I had planned to be careful, to avoid suspicion at all costs. But when we were alone, the lines blurred, and for a moment, I forgot to care about the consequences. What I didn't realize was that someone had seen us. When I got home from the retreat, Eric was waiting for me in the kitchen. He was calm, too calm, his expression unreadable as he sipped his coffee. "How was the retreat?" he asked casually. "It was fine," I said, setting my bag down. "Productive." "Really?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "Because I got a call from a friend who works at your company. He said he saw you with David. Alone." My stomach dropped. "Eric, I can explain," I stammered, my mind racing for an excuse. "Don't," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the room. "I want the truth, Claire. All of it." In that moment, I realized there was no point in lying. The truth was out, and there was no way to undo the damage I'd done. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I never meant to hurt you." Eric stared at me, his expression a mix of anger and heartbreak. "How long?" he asked quietly. "About a year," I admitted, my voice barely audible. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "A year," he repeated. "And you let me believe everything was fine." That night, Eric packed a bag and left. As the door closed behind him, the weight of my actions came crashing down on me. I'd spent so long living in denial, convincing myself that I could have it all. But now, the life I'd built with Eric was gone, shattered by my own choices. And for the first time, I realized just how much I stood to lose. The house felt impossibly quiet after Eric left. For years, our home had been filled with laughter, shared meals, and the comforting rhythm of daily life. Now it was a hollow shell, a reminder of everything I'd destroyed. I spent the first night curled up on the couch, replaying our conversation over and over in my mind. His words echoed in my ears. "A year. And you let me believe everything was fine." He was right. I'd lied to him for so long that I'd convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. But now, The weight of those lies was suffocating. Eric didn't come home the next day, or the day after that. When I tried calling him, it went straight to voicemail. My texts went unanswered, and his social media accounts went dark. I was desperate to talk to him, to explain, to beg for forgiveness. But deep down, I knew there was nothing I could say to undo the damage I'd done. At work, things weren't any better. The person who'd seen David and me at the retreat had clearly been talking. The whispers started the moment I walked into the office. Coworkers exchanging glances, conversations abruptly stopping when I entered the room. David tried to reassure me. "They'll forget about it," he said one evening as we sat in his office. "This kind of thing blows over." But the way people looked at me said otherwise. One day during a meeting, one of my colleagues made a snide remark about climbing the corporate ladder. The room fell silent, all eyes darting between me and David. I wanted to defend myself, to lash out, but I knew it would only make things worse. The shame was unbearable. At home, I threw myself into cleaning, as if scrubbing the floors and rearranging furniture could erase the mess I'd made of my life. Every room was a reminder of Eric, his favorite chair in the living room, the coffee mug he always used, the framed photo of us from our honeymoon. I couldn't bring myself to take it down. One evening, as I sat on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by piles of laundry, I received a text from Eric. "We need to talk." My heart raced as I typed a reply. "Please let me explain. I'm so sorry." His response was brief. "Tomorrow, 7 p.m. The diner." The next day I could barely focus at work. My mind was consumed with thoughts of what Eric might say, whether there was any chance he'd take me back. When 7 p.m. finally arrived, I walked into the diner to find him sitting in a booth, his expression unreadable. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. He nodded but didn't say anything. For a few moments we sat in silence, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Eric broke the silence. "Why?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling. "I don't know," I admitted. I felt lost, bored, like something was missing. "And you thought sleeping with your boss would fix that?" he asked, his tone sharp. "No," I said quickly. "It wasn't about him. It was about me. I made a terrible mistake, Eric, and I hate myself for it." Eric stared at me for a long moment before speaking. "Do you know what hurts the most?" he said, his voice breaking. "It's not the affair. It's the fact that you didn't trust me enough to tell me you were struggling. We could have worked through it together." Tears streamed down my face. "I know," I whispered. "I was selfish. I didn't think about how it would hurt you." "I can't do this anymore, Claire," he said, his voice steady. "I deserve better. And so do you." When he left the diner, I felt a sense of finality I hadn't expected. I'd hoped there was still a chance that we could find a way to rebuild what we'd lost. But Eric's words made it clear. Our marriage was over. The next few weeks were a blur of legal documents and difficult conversations. We divided our assets, sold the house, and began the process of untangling our lives. Eric remained polite but distant, refusing to engage in anything beyond the necessary logistics. It was a stark contrast to the man I'd once known, the man who'd held me during my lowest moments, who'd always found a way to make me laugh. One day, as I packed up the last of my belongings, I came across an old photo album. Flipping through the pages, I saw snapshots of our life together. Holidays, vacations, quiet moments at home. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly feel the weight of what I'd lost. That night, as I sat alone in my new apartment, I made a promise to myself. I couldn't change the past, but I could take responsibility for my actions and learn from them. Eric might never forgive me, but I owed it to myself to become a better person. Someone who wouldn't make the same mistakes again. After the divorce was finalized, I felt unmoored, like a ship adrift in a storm. Eric was gone, the house was sold, and my reputation at work was in tatters. Everything I'd once thought was secure had crumbled, leaving me to face the mess I'd created. For the first time in years, I had to ask myself, who am I without him? Without this life I've destroyed? The answers didn't come easily. The first step was leaving my job. David wanted me to stay, insisting that things would blow over. But I couldn't bear the weight of the whispers, the side glances, the constant reminder of my mistakes. It's not just about the affair, I told him one evening as I handed in my resignation. It's about finding a way to move forward. David didn't argue. I think on some level he understood. Finding a new job wasn't easy. My previous role had been well-paying and prestigious, but my departure, under less than ideal circumstances, had left a stain on my resume. After weeks of searching, I landed a position at a small marketing firm. The pay was lower, and the office wasn't as glamorous, but it was a fresh start, something I desperately needed. The adjustment was humbling. At my old job, I'd been one of the top performers, someone people looked up to. Here I was just another employee, trying to prove myself in a new environment. But the simplicity of the work brought a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Outside of work, I started focusing on myself in ways I never had before. I joined a gym, took up cooking, and even started journaling. Something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. At first, the act of writing felt awkward, like I was exposing my darkest thoughts to an invisible audience. But over time it became a lifeline, a way to untangle the mess in my head and make sense of my emotions. One evening, as I flipped through the pages of my journal, I came across an entry I'd written shortly after the divorce. I don't know who I am without Eric, but maybe that's the point. Maybe it's time to figure that out. Reading those words, I realized how much I'd grown since then. I still didn't have all the answers, but I was learning to stand on my own, to find strength in my solitude. I also started reconnecting with old friends, people I'd drifted away from during my marriage and the chaos that followed. One of those friends was Lisa, someone who'd known me since college. "You look different," she said one evening as we caught up over coffee. "Different how?" I asked, curious. "Lighter," she said, smiling. "Like you're finally letting go of all that baggage." Her words stuck with me. Letting go wasn't easy. There were still nights when I replayed my mistakes in my mind, wondering what might have been if I'd made different choices. But those moments were becoming less frequent, replaced by a growing sense of hope. One weekend, as I organized my apartment, I came across the photo album I'd packed from the old house. For a long time I debated whether to open it. I wasn't sure if I could handle seeing those memories again. But when I finally flipped through the pages, I didn't feel the sharp pang of regret I'd expected. Instead, I felt gratitude for the good times Eric and I had shared, for the lessons I'd learned, and for the person I was becoming. The next time I saw Eric was at a mutual friend's birthday party. I hadn't expected him to be there, and for a moment I debated leaving. But then I saw him, laughing with a group of friends, and something inside me shifted. He looked happy, and for the first time I realized I wanted that for him. Not because I still loved him, but because he deserved it. We ended up talking briefly that night, our conversation polite but warm. "I heard you left your old job," he said, sipping his drink. "I did," I said, nodding. "It was time for a change." "I think that's good," he said. "You seem different." "Lighter?" I asked, smiling. He chuckled. "Yeah, something like that." As I walked home that night, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Eric and I would never be what we once were, but we didn't need to be. We'd both moved on, carving out new paths for ourselves. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I wrote in my journal, "I'm not the person I used to be. And that's okay. Growth doesn't erase the past, but it gives it meaning. I'm learning to forgive myself, to move forward, and to find peace in the life I'm building now." For the first time, I believed those words. The months after seeing Eric at the party felt like a turning point. For so long, I defined myself by my mistakes, carrying the weight of my affair and the collapse of my marriage like a badge of shame. But now, I was beginning to see that my past didn't have to define me. It was part of my story, yes, but it wasn't the whole story. Work at the new marketing firm was steady and predictable. While it lacked the excitement and prestige of my previous job, it gave me something I hadn't realized I needed: structure. There were no late nights, no high-stakes projects, no complicated office politics. Just a team of kind, hardworking people who supported one another. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something simple and honest. One day, during a lunch break, my coworker Jenna invited me to join a volunteer group she was part of. "We work with kids at a community center," she explained. "Tutoring, helping with after-school activities. It's really rewarding. You should come." First, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I had the energy or the emotional bandwidth to commit to something like that. But Jenna's enthusiasm was infectious, and before I knew it, I found myself saying yes. Volunteering at the community center became a surprising source of joy. I spent my afternoons helping kids with homework, organizing art projects, and playing games in the rec room. Their laughter and boundless energy were a welcome antidote to the heaviness I'd been carrying. One little girl, Sophie, became particularly attached to me. "Can you help me with my painting?" she asked one day, holding up a brush with a look of determination. "Of course," I said, sitting down beside her. As we worked together, she looked up at me and said, "You're really nice." Her simple words brought tears to my eyes. Through volunteering, I began to realize how much I'd missed connecting with people, not just on a surface level, but in a way that felt real and meaningful. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about rediscovering a part of myself I thought I'd lost. One weekend, as I cleaned out my apartment, I came across an old notebook filled with sketches I'd done years ago. Art had always been a hobby of mine, something I'd loved, but had pushed aside in the chaos of adult life. Flipping through the pages, I felt a spark of inspiration. I went out that afternoon and bought a set of paints and canvases, setting up a small corner in my living room as an impromptu studio. At first, painting felt awkward, like I was trying to remember a language I hadn't spoken in years. But as I lost myself in the colors and brushstrokes, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. Art became my therapy, a way to process my emotions and express parts of myself I couldn't put into words. One evening, as I worked on a piece inspired by the kids at the community center, Jenna stopped by to drop off some paperwork. "Did you paint that?" she asked, pointing to the canvas. "Yeah," I said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "It's amazing," she said, her eyes wide. "You should show this to people." The idea startled me. I'd never considered my work good enough to share. But Jenna's encouragement planted a seed. A few weeks later, I submitted one of my paintings to a local art show. I didn't expect much, maybe a polite rejection or no response at all. So when I received an email saying my piece had been accepted, I was stunned. "We'd love to feature your work in our upcoming exhibition," the email read. For the first time in years, I felt proud of something I'd created. The night of the art show, I stood in the gallery, surrounded by people who were admiring my work. One woman approached me, her eyes bright. "Your painting is beautiful," she said. "It has so much emotion." "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling. Hearing those words reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I was capable of creating beauty, even in the midst of chaos. Over time, painting became more than just a hobby. It became a way of reclaiming my identity. I wasn't just the woman who'd made mistakes. I was an artist, a volunteer, a friend. I was someone who was learning to live again. One day, as I sat in my living room working on a new piece, I received a message from Eric. It was short and simple. "I saw your painting at the art show. It was amazing. I'm happy for you." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I typed, "Thank you. That means a lot." It wasn't closure, but it was something. That night, as I stood in front of my easel, I thought about how far I'd come. My life wasn't perfect, and I still had a lot of work to do. But for the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. A path I'd chosen for myself. And that, I realized, was enough. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel a sense of stability I hadn't known in years. Work at the marketing firm was steady, volunteering at the community center brought joy, and painting filled the quiet hours at home. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I'd stopped measuring my life against the version of it I'd destroyed. Instead, I focused on the life I was building piece by piece. One afternoon, as I worked on a new painting, Jenna called with exciting news. "The community center is hosting a fundraiser," she said. "They're looking for artists to donate pieces for the silent auction. You should totally do it." The idea made me nervous. My art had always been personal, a way to process my emotions and make sense of my journey. Sharing it in such a public way felt vulnerable. But the thought of using my work to give back to a place that had given me so much was too meaningful to pass up. "I'll do it," I said, my voice trembling with equal parts fear and excitement. The weeks leading up to the fundraiser were a blur of preparation. I spent hours in my little makeshift studio, pouring my heart into a piece that captured the essence of what the community center meant to me: hope, resilience, and connection. When the night of the fundraiser arrived, I felt a mix of pride and nerves as I watched people admire my painting. "It's beautiful," a woman said, her eyes scanning the vibrant colors. "There's so much feeling in it." "Thank you," I said, smiling. The painting ended up selling for more than I could have imagined, and all the proceeds went to the center. For the first time, I felt like I was giving something back. The experience inspired me to get more involved with the center. I started teaching a weekly art class for the kids, showing them how to express themselves through painting and drawing. The class quickly became the highlight of my week. Watching the kids create without fear or judgment reminded me of why I'd fallen in love with art in the first place. One day, as I helped Sophie with her painting, she looked up at me and said, "Miss Claire, are you an artist?" The question caught me off guard. "I guess I am," I said, smiling. "Good," she said firmly. "Because you're really good at it." Her words stayed with me long after the class ended. At the same time, I began to reconnect with myself in other ways. I started taking better care of my health, experimenting with new recipes in the kitchen and going for morning runs in the park. I also began attending therapy, working through the guilt and shame that had weighed me down for so long. "It's okay to feel regret," my therapist said during one session. "But regret doesn't have to define you. It can be a guide, a reminder of what you've learned and how far you've come." Her words resonated deeply. One evening, as I walked home from the community center, I ran into Lisa, my old college friend. "You seem different," she said, her tone thoughtful. "Different how?" I asked. "Happier," she said simply. "Like you've finally found your place." Her observation caught me off guard, but as I thought about it, I realized she was right. For the first time, I felt like I belonged not just in my community but in my own skin. The kids at the community center continued to inspire me. One evening, as we cleaned up after class, a boy named Marcus held up his painting and said, "Do you think people will like it?" "Of course they will," I said. "But the most important thing is, do you like it?" He thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I do." "Then that's all that matters," I said, smiling. That night, as I sat in my apartment working on a new painting, I thought about how far I'd come. I wasn't the same person who'd made those mistakes, who'd hurt Eric and sabotaged her own happiness. I was someone who had faced her flaws, learned from them, and found a way to grow. My past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. A few weeks later, I received a message from Eric. It was short and simple. "Sophie told me you're teaching art at the center. That's amazing. I'm proud of you." His words brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I'd carried the fear that Eric would always see me as the person who had hurt him. But now it seemed he saw the person I was becoming. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I'm learning that forgiveness isn't just about others. It's about forgiving yourself. My mistakes don't define me. What matters is what I do next." As I set down my pen, I felt a quiet sense of peace. My journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. Life had settled into a rhythm I never thought I'd find again. Between work, volunteering, and my art, I felt like I was building something real. A life rooted in authenticity rather than the lies and distractions that had once consumed me. There were still moments of doubt, nights when the weight of my mistakes crept back in. But they didn't define me anymore. I was finally learning to move forward. The art classes at the community center became a cornerstone of my week. Each session brought new challenges and moments of joy. Some of the kids were hesitant, unsure of their abilities, while others dove in with abandon, unafraid to experiment. Sophie, my most enthusiastic student, continued to shine. One day, as she worked on a painting of a sunset, she said, "Miss Claire, do you ever think about the stuff you messed up?" Her question caught me off guard. "All the time," I admitted. "But you know what? Mistakes are like art. You can't erase them, but you can learn from them and make something beautiful out of the mess." Sophie grinned, nodding thoughtfully. "I like that," she said. The kids weren't the only ones who benefited from the classes. Teaching them reminded me of the power of creativity, not just to express but to heal. And as I watched them discover their own talents, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't known in years. One weekend, as I worked on a new painting, Jenna stopped by with exciting news. "The community center is hosting an open house next month," she said. "They want to showcase some of the kids' art. And yours too." "Mine?" I asked, startled. "Of course," she said, smiling. "You've inspired them so much. It's only fair to show off your work too." The idea made me nervous, but the thought of sharing the spotlight with my students felt meaningful. "I'll do it," I said, my voice firm. Preparing for the open house became a labor of love. I worked with the kids to select their best pieces, helping them frame and title their work. "Do you think people will like mine?" Marcus asked one day, holding up a bold abstract painting. "They'll love it," I said. "But remember, art isn't about what other people think. It's about what it means to you." He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. The night of the open house, the community center buzzed with excitement. Parents, friends, and neighbors filled the room, admiring the artwork displayed on easels and walls. Sophie ran up to me, her eyes wide. "Look at all the people," she said, beaming. "They're here for you," I said, smiling. Her grin widened as she darted off to show her painting to a group of visitors. As I stood by my own work, I overheard snippets of conversation. "Her pieces are so emotional," one woman said. "You can feel the story behind them. It's like she's turning her pain into something beautiful," another added. Their words stayed with me, a reminder of how far I'd come. Near the end of the evening, I spotted Eric among the crowd. I hadn't expected him to come, and for a moment I considered slipping out of sight. But then he caught my eye and smiled, making his way over. "Hey," he said, his tone warm but tentative. "Hey," I replied, my heart racing. We stood in silence for a moment, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. "You've done something amazing here," he said, finally, gesturing to the room. "The kids, the art, it's incredible." "Thanks," I said, my voice trembling. "That means a lot." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm proud of you, Claire. Truly." As he walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions, gratitude, relief, and a quiet sense of closure. Eric's words weren't an invitation to revisit the past, but they felt like a confirmation that we were both moving forward. That night, as I cleaned up the gallery space, Sophie ran over and hugged me tightly. "Thank you for helping me," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "You helped yourself, Sophie," I said, smiling. "I just showed you the way." Driving home, I thought about how much my life had changed. I wasn't the same person who had made those terrible choices, who had hurt the people she loved most. I was someone who had faced her mistakes, learned from them, and found a way to turn them into something meaningful. And for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The open house marked a turning point for me. It wasn't just about the success of the event or the kind words I'd received. It was about realizing how much I'd grown. For so long, I'd lived in the shadow of my mistakes, convinced that I'd never escape them. But now I could see that my past didn't define me. What mattered was the life I was building, the connections I was making, the impact I was having, and the person I was becoming. The art classes at the community center continued to flourish, attracting more kids and even a few adults. One evening, as I helped Marcus with a new project, he said, "Miss Claire, do you think you'll ever teach somewhere else? Like a real art school?" I laughed. "This is a real art school," I said, smiling. "But you're really good," he said earnestly. "You could teach anywhere." His words made me pause. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility of something bigger, of taking my passion for art and sharing it with an even wider audience. At the same time, I began to explore new opportunities in my personal life. I joined a local hiking group, started attending art workshops, and even signed up for a creative writing class. Each new experience felt like a step toward rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten or ignored. One weekend, during a hike with the group, I struck up a conversation with a man named Paul. He was kind and funny, with an easygoing demeanor that put me at ease. As we walked, he asked, "What made you get into art?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. But something about his genuine curiosity made me feel safe. "It started as a way to process things," I admitted. "But now it's become so much more. It's my way of connecting, With myself and with others. Paul nodded thoughtfully. That's powerful, he said. You're lucky to have something like that. Over the next few months, Paul and I grew closer. He wasn't just interested in my art, he wanted to know about every part of me, the good and the bad. When I finally told him about my past, I braced myself for judgment. But instead he said, "We've all made mistakes, Claire. What matters is what we do after." His acceptance felt like a balm to my soul. As my relationship with Paul deepened, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't in years. He encouraged me to take risks, to dream bigger, to believe in my own potential. "You should have your own gallery," he said one evening as we walked through the city. I laughed, shaking my head. "That's a big dream." "Why not?" he said, smiling. "You're talented, Claire. People should see your work." Inspired by his words, I started looking into local galleries and spaces where I could showcase my art. The idea was daunting, but it also felt exciting. A chance to step into a new chapter of my life. One day, as I sorted through my portfolio, I came across a painting I'd done shortly after my divorce. It was dark and chaotic, filled with sharp lines and heavy strokes. But within the chaos there was a small burst of color, a hint of light breaking through. Looking at it now, I realized it wasn't just a reflection of my pain. It was a testament to my resilience. The following week, I submitted my work to a local gallery, including that piece. When the curator called to tell me I'd been accepted, I felt a rush of emotions, pride, gratitude, and a sense of validation I hadn't expected. The night of the gallery opening, I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by my paintings and the people who had supported me. Paul was there, along with Jenna, Lisa, and even some of the kids from the community center. "I can't believe this is all yours," Sophie said, her eyes wide as she looked around. "Me neither," I said, smiling. Toward the end of the night, I spotted Eric near one of my paintings. I hadn't expected him to come, but seeing him there felt right. As I approached, he turned to me, a small smile on his face. "This is incredible, Claire," he said. "You've come a long way." "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "That means a lot." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. "I'm happy for you," he said finally. "I'm happy for you too," I said. That night, as I locked up the gallery and walked home, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't known I needed. Eric and I would always share a past, but our futures were our own. And for the first time I felt at peace with that. Years later, as I stood in my own studio, a space I'd rented to teach art classes and showcase my work, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It hadn't been easy and it hadn't been linear. But every mistake, every loss, and every moment of growth had led me to this life. A life filled with purpose, connection, and love. I wasn't just someone who had made mistakes. I was an artist, a teacher, a friend, and a partner. And as I looked at the students gathered around me, brushes in hand and laughter filling the room, I knew one thing for certain. I was exactly where I was meant to be.